Hello, Indy Reformed. This is the video for week 4, day 3. And we're continuing our look at covenant theology now, and we are looking now at the covenant of works. This is the covenant which God made with Adam in the garden. Now, if you read the first 3 chapters of Genesis, you may be objecting at this point. You may be thinking, well, you're trying to pull a fast one there. There's no covenant there. I don't see the word used. And you would be right, at least in the second part. The word covenant is not used in the beginning of Genesis, but we see that all the parts of the covenant are there. Everything that we saw in the first 2 weeks comes to play in Genesis 1 through 3. So, we look at all the parts. We know that God speaks to his people in ways they understand. And when an ancient Israelite would hear or read this passage of the Bible, they would automatically think, oh, that's a covenant. The word would not necessarily have to be used for them to understand that was being talked about. It's like us. If someone tells us that a man and a woman dressed up, went to a church, stood in front of a minister and a crowd, told each other things and gave each other rings, they wouldn't have to use the word wedding for us to know automatically, oh, that's what they're talking about. It's much the same with the covenant of works in Genesis 3. That's clearly what it was, even though the word is not used. Just like the word sin is not used in Genesis 3, yet that's clearly what happened in the fall of man. So what is this covenant of works? Well, first of all, it is a covenant begun or initiated by God. God began this just as he did with all the covenants that we'll look at over the next few weeks. God created Adam, and he placed him in the Garden of Eden, and he gave him commands, and there were blessings for obedience to the commands and curses for disobedience to the commands. So we see all the elements of a covenant are here. And there are 2 parties here, God and Adam. They come together in this covenant for a specific purpose. We see that there's a relationship built here now based on this covenant that if Adam obeys God, he will have blessings. If he disobeys, he will have cursings. This is legal and binding. It can be broken. Adam was created by God with the ability to sin and the ability not to sin. And we know, of course, that he did sin. And what was then the curse for disobedience, the curse for sinning? Well, we see that God says very clearly that it is death in Genesis chapter 2. And is this just physical death? Well, no. We know that as soon as Adam ate of the fruit, that he sinned against God, that he disobeyed God's direct commandment to him. The curse fell upon him, and he did not physically die right then and there. It would be many, many years before he would physically die. But there's more than one kind of death. There is spiritual death. Adam was now separated from God. There was now conflict between them. Where before there had been harmony. Adam had broken the covenant of works. He had broken this legal binding agreement with his God and Creator. And ultimately, the curse of the covenant of works leads to everlasting death, to suffering the wrath of God for eternity in hell, as we'll see, especially as we see what happens in the covenants that come after it. And so we can ask, okay, if that was the curses for disobedience, what were the blessings for obedience? Well, the blessings for obedience are the opposite of the curses. Instead of death, the blessings would be life. And not just any life, but everlasting life. So we see in the Garden of Eden that Adam was placed there. He was put basically in the garden as a temple, and he was a priest. And he was to keep it clean. He was to keep it pure and holy. And when the enemy of God, the serpent, Satan, came in, he was to drive him out, but instead he entered into a covenant with the devil. So this is really the bad news. This is what sets the stage for everything else that happens in the Bible. Everything else that occurs in the history of redemption is a result of this. It's dealing with this. It's trying to fix this, or it's showing this to us more clearly. And so this is the covenant of works. It's not a happy topic. But thankfully, as we will see, although the first Adam failed, there was a second Adam. And we'll begin to talk about that tomorrow.